Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and of course it is the beginning of the month, so this means Patreon requests, and today we're going to be looking at a request from Bladed Thesis, and he's asked me to look at the band Ghost Machine. Never heard of them before, so of course I had to look them up. And it says here, Ghost Machine was an American metal band from Los Angeles, California, active in the mid-2000s. It featured two members from Motorgrater, whatever that is, vocalist Ivan Moody, also vocalist for Five Finger Death Punch, who I have covered before, only once I think, but I have covered them before, and drummer Chris Crispy Binns, as well as John Stevens from The Clay People. Never heard of them either. Either. So it seems like it's possibly a supergroup, you know, when it comes together, but I don't know. We shall see. Ghost Machine came together when vocalist Ivan Moody and guitarist John Stevens met at XM Radio. Moody's band, Motorgrater, previously signed to Elektra Records, were to perform live on air. When John, an XM Radio producer, impressed with Moody's vocals, thought he would be a good fit with the material he had written for a previous project. After several recording sessions, drummer Chris Binns from Motorgrater, formerly Intrinsic, was recruited, along with electronic keyboard programmer Brett Davis and bassist Mike McLaughlin, formerly also of Intrinsic. The band released their self-titled album Ghost Machine in 2005 via their own label Black Blood Records. The album was engineered and co-produced by Pete Murray, Low Pro, whatever that means. On December 2005, the band signed with independent label Corporate Punishment Records. The band's second album, Hypersensitive, was released in November of 2006, featuring 10 new tracks which were not on the band's previous release. Well, you'd hope not. The song Siesta Loca from the album is featured on the Saw 3 soundtrack, so the chances are I have heard this band, but I didn't know it. Ivan Moody is no longer listed on the band's page as a member. When asked if he was going to work with Ghost Machine again, he said, "I don't. Ghost Machine was something I did for fun. Lots of good friends involved, but it was never intended to be huge or even a band. We literally made 20,000 copies. It was just something as a spiritual release more than to get anyone's attention." So it says that the band doesn't exist anymore. They seem to have been active between 2005 and 2007, so they were only active for 2 years and released 2 albums. So it doesn't specify what music they make. It says genre here: alternative metal, industrial metal, experimental rock and progressive rock. So that could mean absolutely bloody anything. There's someone very loud outside. It's really quite annoying. Anyway, so I don't really have much of an idea as to what this band sounds like, but it'll be interesting to find out. Now, I've been asked to look at a track called Burning Bridges. I have got some lyrics here. They do come from Genius Lyrics, however, and, you know, our past experience with them has been somewhat sketchy. They've not always been 100% reliable, but it is what it is. So, yeah, I think we'll just jump into the track and see what we've got. But before we do that, if you could just take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it would really, really mean the world to me. You know, I've been doing this for roughly 7 years at this point, and not even 3% of people watching my videos are actually subscribed, which is a little bit disheartening, because, you know, I like to think I do something a little bit different than most other reactors. You know, they'll look at a song and go, yeah, I like it, no I didn't, and that's about all you'll get. You know, I like to actually talk about the song, investigate what the song is talking about, the themes and morals and stories, you know. So I think I do something a little bit different than most other channels. I don't think there's really many, if any, other channels that do that, and, you know, I thought it would be something interesting. So anyway, you know, if you could like and subscribe, it'd really help me out. It doesn't cost you anything, it takes a fraction of a second, but it does make the biggest difference to me and the channel. But with that being said, let's jump into this track and see what we've got. So this is Burning Bridges by Ghost Machine. Let's have a look. Okay, wasn't expecting that sound.
It's been a long, dark road, but I remember when it meant the world It's been a long dark day and a cold black night, and it still gets hard to see, 'cause they don't know me, and they never will. It's been a long dark road, I still remember why it took so much out of me. It's a shallow pond we're swimming in, and it makes it hard to breathe, 'cause they don't know me, and they never will. No, they don't know why or how it feels to live. It's been a long dark road, and I remember skies that weren't so hard to see. It's been a long dark day, and I remember nights that made me me, 'cause they don't know me, and they never will, and they don't know why or how it feels to live.
Well, there you go. Burning Bridges by Ghost Machine. Gotta say, not what I expected. You know, you hear the name Ivan Moody, you know, conjures up Five Finger Death Punch. Why is it every time I'm recording people want to talk to me, but throughout the day when I'm doing nothing, nobody ever wants to speak to me? Anyway, you know, I'm obviously familiar with Five Finger Death Punch's music, you know, normally quite heavy, quite, you know, in your face. This was not at all what I expected, you know, looking at the description of the band, you know, it said heavy metal, industrial, experimental, progressive, etc. This was just, well, it sounded like one man and his guitar in a very sort of quiet and, what's the word, contemplative ballad. So, yeah, not at all what I expected, but it was still nicely performed, you know. Obviously, it's no secret that it is Ivan Moody, isn't it? I only said his name a few times in the bloody... yeah, it is Ivan Moody, you know. It's no secret that he has a powerful voice, you know, because I've covered the Five Finger Death Punch once before, and I can't even remember the name of the song, but it was a song about homeless veterans and that sort of thing. And, you know, he gave a very, very powerful performance, so it's, you know, it's not a secret that he's got a powerful voice. Very divisive band, Five Finger Death Punch. I don't know how this band was taken, you know, but it is what it is. But like I said, it seems to be quite a contemplative, introspective song, because you look at the name Burning Bridges, that's normally implying, like forever severing yourself from someone or something else, getting into such a heated argument that you've completely cut yourself off from that person. You're never able to go back to that person because there is so much bad blood between you. But that doesn't seem to come through in the lyrics to this track. There's nothing that sort of suggests that. The way I've read it and listened to it, it sounds like he's talking about surviving difficult days, possibly depression or that sort of thing. That's what it sounds like when I actually look at it. So why it's called Burning Bridges, I'm not entirely certain. Because it opens up with the lines, "It's been a long dark road, but I remember when it meant the world to me. It's been a long dark day and a cold black night, and it still gets hard to see." So a long dark road suggests sort of solitude. It suggests, being alone, and you're in a dark place, normally associated with things like depression. But I remember when it meant the world to me. So, I remember when I used to be happy. I remember when I used to look forward to what was coming. But, he says it's been a long dark day and a cold black night, and it still gets hard to see. So that sort of implies, he used to live each day with so much excitement, looking forward to the next day, so much anticipation. But he's then gone, it's a long dark night and it's a cold black night, and it still gets hard to see. So he's in a very, very dark place now, and it's a very long road. Again, that sort of suggests loneliness, isolation, and it's hard to see. So, it's hard to look forward to what's coming. He can't see any prospects, perhaps. So that's what it seems to suggest so far. There doesn't seem to be any implication of a destructive relationship where they've severed all ties so far. And I say so far, but really there isn't anything that suggests that in the rest of the track. So that's what Burning Bridges is always sort of symbolised, sort of a irreversible event. It could possibly be taken as an irreversible event. He's found himself in this dark place and he doesn't know how to get back. Could be a suggestion as to why the title is as it is, but I don't know. Anyway, it goes into a short chorus. It says, "'Cause they don't know me and they never will." Now, this is the only couple of lines that really suggest the possibility of him severing ties with people, but not necessarily in a heated, argumentative kind of way. Maybe he's cut himself off from people because he might not feel comfortable around them. He might not want to burden them with his problems. And, this is something that I've done in the past, like, I found myself in a bad sort of situation. I found myself miserable, depressed, and I've cut myself off from all the people around me. I've isolated myself, kept myself to myself, and just sort of pushed everyone else away because I didn't want to burden them with my problems. And could that be what he's saying there? They don't know me and they never will. He can't open up to people. He feels like he can't open up to people, or, he just doesn't want to, maybe. Because he doesn't want to burden them with his problems. He doesn't want people to know too much about him, because maybe then they'll hate him rather than just be distant from him. I don't know. It goes into the next verse, and it's pretty similar. "It's been a long, dark road. I still remember why it took so much out of me. It's a shallow pond we're swimming in, and it makes it hard to breathe." So again, there's that, imagery of a long, dark road, that sort of solitude. I still remember why it took so much out of me. That could be, again, going back to the idea of possibly depression, it took so much out of I remember why it took so much out of me. It's like the idea of perhaps putting on a fake smile, putting on a brave face, putting out an outwards appearance of contentment and happiness to show to the world. And it's exhausting to do that. You're always trying to pretend to be happy, to be content with your life, so that you don't bring down everybody around you, and so that people won't ask you questions. It's like inside you're sort of wanting to curl up and die in a corner, but you don't want people to know that, so you put on that brave face, and it's exhausting constantly trying to pretend that you're okay when you're not. That could be what he means there. It's a shallow pond we're swimming in, and it makes it hard to breathe. So, I mean, that could be a reference to, it's going to sound weird, it could be a reference to fish. If fish are in, water that's too shallow, maybe they can't breathe properly, that sort of thing. Or, it's a shallow pond, there's no space to grow, maybe, or, there's not much to the existence, perhaps. That could just be that as well. There's not much to his existence. It's a very thin, very shallow world that he's living in. There's nothing to aspire to reach for, possibly. I don't know. Could be that. And then it goes into an extended version of the chorus saying, "'Cause they don't know me and they never will. No, they don't know why or how it feels to live." And again, that could push towards the idea of depression, that sort of thing, because they don't know me and they never will, we talked about that, because maybe he's pushed people away because he doesn't want to burden them, he doesn't want them to get to know him all that well. No, they don't know why or how it feels to live, they don't know why I've pushed them away, perhaps. They don't know why I've severed ties with these people, don't know why I've cut them out of my life, because maybe these people aided in his depression. I don't know. He could have cut ties with them because they made him so miserable, or he could have cut ties with them because he was miserable and didn't want to spread it to them. It could be a two-way thing. But they don't know why or how it feels to live. They don't understand what it is to live this way, perhaps. To constantly feel miserable and under pressure to appease everyone, to put on that fake smile. That could be what he's saying there. I don't know. It's been a long dark road, and I remember skies that weren't so hard to see. It's been a long dark day, and I remember nights that made me me. So again, that long dark road. And I remember skies that weren't so hard to see. So I remember the days when the skies might have been brighter, when my vision wasn't clouded, when the darkness wasn't encroaching so much upon me that it made it hard to see ahead of myself, when I had the prospect of something off in the distance, when there was a goal that I could see, that I could reach. I remember the days when I had hope and, something to look forward to. I do remember those days. It's been a long dark day, and I remember nights that made me me. Now, this could be quite a deep and profound line, even though it's quite simple, because nighttime, when you suffer with things like depression and stuff like that, are possibly the worst times, because at that point you're by yourself. You feel alone. It's a very dark place. You can't see anybody, you can't see anything, and all you have with you is your thoughts. And I mean, I went through this just last night. I didn't get any sleep at all last night. I am absolutely bloody knackered because my brain just would not shut the fuck up. It's thinking all sorts of things. Like, I was laying there trying to get to sleep, and then it was like, hey, why don't we write this as a book? Why don't you write this piece of music? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? How many noodles are in a packet of noodles? My brain just won't shut the fuck up, But it's also those sort of nights of introspection where you're laying there and your brain is like maybe playing over scenarios from your past, telling you, reminding you of all the terrible things that have happened in your life, or reminding you of all the bad things that have happened to you, or reminding you of all the bad things that you've done, or coming up with alternative versions of what you could have done in a given situation. Maybe you'd made a bad choice. Maybe, you had a choice, you took one choice, and your brain's sitting there going, yes, but what if you took the other one? What would that be like? Those those sorts of nights where you think about those sort of things, all the experiences that you've been through make you who you are. And, he's saying, I remember nights that shaped my personality, that turned me into who I am now, whether it be, because of misery that was brought on by these memories, or my resolve to change myself because of what had happened. That could be what he's saying there. And then he goes back into that chorus, as it were, because they don't know me and they never will, and they don't know why or how it feels to live. And that's about it. So, it's, like I said, it's a very introspective sort of song, it's very contemplative, sort of talking about, why he, the fact that he's perhaps struggling, the fact that he seems to have distanced himself from people, perhaps burnt bridges, and severed ties with people that he perhaps really cared about. He might have cut himself away from them because he didn't want to hurt them with his own problems. He didn't want to burden them with the things that were making him miserable. That could be what that meant, or he might have cut off all ties from them because they caused him to feel that way. It's unclear. But, it's a good song. It's not at all what I expected, and the performance, it was a very minimalist experience. It was literally one man and his guitar. It might have been one man and another guy and his guitar. Who knows? But, it was a very minimalistic song. It was literally just guitar and vocals, and that's it. And it was well performed. Like I said, he's obviously got a very powerful voice. We know this from Five Finger Death Punch and the like. It was very well performed. It was a decent song. I quite like it. Like I said, it's a very sort of thought-provoking, introspective sort of thing. Contemplative piece of music. So, yeah, not a bad piece of music at all. But I'm not really sure what else I can say on that. I could be way off base with the way I've interpreted that, but that's immediately what it said to me. If anybody can shed any light onto what it's actually about, please do let me know. Because I'd be very interested, because I'm sure there was something about Moody and his personal life at one point. He had a lot of troubles in his personal life. It could be talking about that. I don't know. So, if anybody can shed any light onto what the song is actually about, please let me know. But I don't really know what else I can say on that, so I think I will leave that as it is. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like or a subscribe if you haven't already. It would really, really mean the world to me. I've been doing this for about 7 years at this point, and not even 3% of people watching my videos are actually subscribed. And, that's a little bit disheartening, because, I like to think I do something different than most other reactors. They'll look at a piece of music and go, yeah, I liked it. No, I didn't. And that's normally about all you'll get. I like to actually talk about the themes and the meanings within the songs. I actually want to react to the actual song, not just listen to it and go, yeah, it was good. That to me is not a reaction. That's just an opinion. I want to find out what the stories, the themes and the meanings and the morals are behind the music, because very often, heavy metal has been given this unfair sort of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, people have come under the misconception that heavy metal is all about murder, mayhem, blood, gore, sacrifice and evil, and that's quite simply not true. I've covered nearly 900 songs on this channel, and many of them have had real-world applications talking about things like homeless veterans, depression, anxiety, and homelessness, and, domestic violence and things like that, talking about real-world issues that really should be addressed, that you just don't really hear about in popular music, And I want to dismiss this misconception that heavy metal is all evil, bad and cruel, and because it's really not. This is why I talk about what the songs are about, because I want to find out what the song means, what the message it's trying to to put forward, rather than these shallow, vapid songs that you hear about whining about their 13th odd boyfriend who broke up with them because they're a whiny bitch, or talking about bitches, hoes and busting caps in asses, that sort of thing. These are songs with meaning, and I want to explore that, find out what it means. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? Do you interpret it different to me? If so, how do you interpret it? I want to have this discussion, this conversation, and that's why I do what I do. And I thought other people might be interested or even enjoy that sort of in-depth look at what a song means. So, if you could like and subscribe, it would really, really mean the world to me. It doesn't cost you anything, takes a fraction of a second, but it does make the biggest difference. to me and the channel. But yeah, that's about all I've got for you on that one. Thank you all very, very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
'Cause they don't know me, and they